What we're going to do is we're going to take a couple days to work on finding polynomial roots. The first day, we're just going to be looking for them, and then the next day, we're going to be graphing them. So this is step one. What our process is we're looking to see where our polynomial crosses the x-axis. So whenever it crosses the x-axis, that's when our y value is 0. So we're going to take our function, and what we're going to do is we're going to factor it either using synthetic division or factor by grouping. We're going to set the equation equal to 0, and then we're going to find each of our zeros. And so that's our process that we're going to look at right now. So for the first one, before we get into finding all the zeros, what we're going to do is we're going to list the possible zeros. Now, how we find the possible zeros is all the possible factors of 8 divided by all the factors of 1. 1 is a really nice number because it would just be 1. So that means that our possible ones are plus or minus 1, plus or minus 2, plus or minus 4, plus or minus 8. Once again, all the factors of 8. Now, letter B is a little bit more complicated because we have all the factors of 3, which of course would be 1 and 3. And then what we have is all the factors of 4. Now, before, factors of 1 is just 1. So if we divided all these by 1, obviously it would still be the same number. So that's why we didn't even put it. But the factors of 4 are a little bit more complicated because we have plus or minus 1, plus or minus 2, and plus or minus 4. So we're taking each of our x values, or I should say each of the numerators, and dividing it by each of the denominators. So we're going to start off plus or minus 1, because 1 divided by 1 is 1. Plus or minus 3, because 3 divided by 1 is 3. Plus or minus 1 half, because 1 divided by 2 is a half. Plus or minus 3 halves. Plus or minus 1/4, and plus or minus 3/4. Now for letter C, what we're going to do is all the factors of 12 divided by all the factors of 3. So what we have is plus or minus 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, and 12. Divided by all the factors of 3, plus or minus 1 and plus or minus 3. So we have x equals, and then we have plus or minus 1, plus or minus 2, plus or minus 3, plus or minus 4, plus or minus 6, plus or minus 12. We're going to take each of those values and divide them by 3. So plus or minus 1/3, plus or minus 2/3, plus or minus 4/3. 3/3, which is 1. We already have 1. Then we have 4/3. Then we have 6/3, which is 2. We already have 2. And then 12/3, which is 4, and we already have 4. So that would be all of our answers. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to look at finding the actual zeros, where it actually crosses the x-axis. So we're going to start off with our possibilities. So we know what our possibilities are. Plus or minus 1, plus or minus 2, plus or minus 5, plus or minus 10. Once again, all the factors of 10. So what we're going to do is we're going to set up our synthetic division. Our coefficients are 1, -4, -7, and 10. We're just looking at the numbers in the front. And then what we have to do is we have to pick one of the values. Now, it doesn't matter which value that we pick. So let's say I pick 2, because 2 is one of our possibilities. I've written down the 1. 2 times 1 is 2, -2. 2 times -2 is -4. And then that's -11. 2 times -11 is -22. And that does not give us 0. So that means that it does not cross the x-axis. So what we have to do is we have to try again. So I know that 2 is not a possibility. So I'm going to try 1. 1 times 1 is 1. That gives me -3. 1 times -3 is -3. That gives me negative 10. 1 times negative 10 is negative 10, and that gives me a 0. So that means it works. So 1 is a possible answer. 1 is an answer. Now we're going to take our x squared minus 3x minus 10, and we're going to set it equal to 0. And we're going to factor it. Two numbers that multiply together give us negative 10. Add up to negative 3 would be negative 5 and 2. So x minus 5 and x plus 2 is equal to 0. And so our answers are 5, negative 2, and then the one at the very beginning, which is 1. Okay, let's look at the next one. So letter B. First thing that we're going to do is we're going to state all of our possibles. So we have x equals plus or minus 1, plus or minus 3, plus or minus 9. Those are all the factors divided by 1. Now we're going to do all the factors divided by 2. So plus or minus a half, plus or minus 3 halves, plus or minus 9 halves. And then what we're going to do is we're going to look at all of them divisible by 4. So plus or minus 1/4, plus or minus 3/4, and plus or minus 9/4. We're going to set up our synthetic division for negative 8, negative 15, and 9. And what we're going to do is we're going to pick a number that we think it might be. So looking at this, let's pick 3. 4, we bring down the 4. 3 times 4 is 12. That gives us 4. 3 times 4 is 12. That gives us negative 3. 3 times negative 3 is negative 9, and that gives us a 0. So it worked. A lot nicer when it works the first time, but it doesn't always work out that way. When we write it, what we have is 4x squared plus 4x minus 3 equals 0. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to factor it. Two numbers that multiply together give me negative 12. Add up to 4. That would be 6 and negative 2. And since we have a leading coefficient of 4, we divide them both by 4. That reduces to 3 halves, and this reduces to negative a half. So what we have is 2x plus 3, and we have 2x minus 1 is equal to 0. So x is equal to negative 3 halves and positive 1 half. Now, because it's a cubic, we should have 3 answers, so we have to remember our original one, which was 3. Okay, looking at letter C. We have plus or minus 1, plus or minus 2, plus or minus 3, plus or minus 6, because we want all the factors of 6. We have 1, 2, negative 5, negative 4, and negative 6. Oh, positive 6. So now what we're going to do is we're going to pick one of the numbers. One hint that you could always do is, and what I always like to look for, is if I can add up all the numbers and they add up to 0, 1 plus 2 plus 6 is 9, minus 9, then I know that one of the answers is 1. So that's the first one that I always look at. Do the values add up to 0? So I bring down the 1. 1 times 1 is 1. That's 3. 1 times 3 is 3. That's negative 2. 1 times negative 2 is negative 2, which is negative 6. And 1 times negative 6 is negative 6, so that's 0. Now we have a problem. And the problem is that there's 4 terms. So what we're going to do is we're going to do synthetic division again. And we're going to pick one of the numbers. I'm going to pick negative 3. So I bring down the 1. Negative 3 times 1 is negative 3. That gives me a 0. Negative 3 times 0 is 0. That's negative 2. Negative 3 times negative 2 is 6. And so it works. Now this one becomes x squared minus 2 equals 0. That one we can't factor, but we can add the 2. and then we take the square root, and so what we get is x equals plus or minus the square root of 2. Now, this is degree 4, so we have 4 answers. Notice that our 2 answers at the beginning, 1 and -3. And that right there is our answer. Now, looking at our last one, what I want to do is show you another method. Sometimes you could factor it by grouping, and this one you can. The other ones we couldn't. So when we're looking at this right here, we see that if we set it equal to 0, they have a x squared in common, and that gives us 2x minus 5. Then they have a -2 in common, and that gives us a 2x minus 5. They both have an x minus 5 in common, so we have 2x minus 5. And then we have x squared minus 2. We're going to set that equal to 0. So when we're finding our zeros, we have 5 halves from our first one. Notice the x squared minus 2, that's what we just solved in the previous one, so we know it's plus or minus square root of 2. And that gives us our answers. So sometimes factor by grouping can be a faster method.